Welcome back. All right, so having just done a video where I talked about Atlanta and the perils of expansion, and this is because we've got expansion coming in, where you've got Seattle coming in. So I've got Seattle hat in my Seattle tank through bench clearers. Jerseys will be available, I think next month is when we'll see jerseys available through the Seattle team store, and they'll be available at the retail level. I think it's September. I know it's been pushed back. Productions of everything have been pushed back over the last 16 months, so it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if we see the jerseys come out a little bit later than we'd expected. But with Seattle coming in, the next conversation is going to be a simple one. Does the NHL expand beyond 32? Now there were discussions within the last few years about the NHL wanting to go to 40 teams. Have an eight team division in Europe. And as crazy as that sounds, it would attract a lot of interest. It would definitely, juice things up a little bit, but we'll get into that. So I'm going to make the arguments to stop at 32. And then I'm going to make the arguments for not stopping. Full disclosure, I believe stopping at 32 is best. I think just it works. So we'll go through this first. There's 16 teams in and 16 teams out of the playoffs starting next season. I love that. The fact that when I started watching hockey, there were 16 out of 21 that made it wasn't very good because it was relatively easy to make the playoffs. And it really was a matter of, teams could kind of just coast through the second half of the season and then, well, we'll see what happens in the postseason. And there wasn't the level of competition we have now. And even now, there will still be people complaining that certain teams shouldn't be in the playoffs that are there, and certain teams should be that aren't. But comparatively speaking, with back in the 80s, it is so much better now. It is just so much better. Bad teams don't make the playoffs. Bad teams used to make, I'm talking really historically bad teams could have a chance to make the playoffs with 59, 60 points. Just ridiculous. So we will also have 4 divisions, 8 teams in each division. That's the kind of level playing field we've been looking for a long time. And I remember when we had 16 teams in the East and 14 in the West, and a lot of people were scratching their heads at how's the NHL going to fix this? Why isn't it 15 and 15? And obviously the NHL wanted 2 teams in the West. There were rumors about Kansas City. Unfortunately for people in Kansas City, while there's an NHL building there waiting, there just wasn't that ownership and there wasn't that opportunity that was taken up to have a team there. So Kansas City fell by the wayside, but Las Vegas emerged. The NHL understood that Las Vegas was a potentially huge market that wasn't being tapped into by any of the other leagues, and they got in there first. And now, of course, we've seen the NFL jump in. There's rumors about baseball. There's rumors about basketball. It's going to be a very full sports market, and it is a sports city, and it makes sense. It's been seen as a gambling city for a long time, but Vegas is a sports city, and Seattle's kind of a no-brainer. Seattle will work. Seattle is a city that's got over 100 years of history with hockey, so it'll work. But there are other cities as well where it could, right? So we're going to have this discussion. I didn't do the video this year on which teams might be need relocation because there aren't any. There isn't any window right now where a team could potentially relocate. There's just nothing there. So you have 4 divisions of 8 teams, perfect. 16 teams in the playoffs and 16 out, also perfect in my eyes. Struggling franchises. So I point this out because we still have Arizona losing money. You've got Florida where they've been rumored to be losing money. Other franchises are rumored to be losing money. There is that phrase, you are only as strong as your weakest link. And it's always been interesting to me that the NHL has franchises that struggle and they still expand while you've got franchises that are struggling rather than fixing that. So to me, if there's certain locations or like Houston, right? Houston, maybe Kansas City jumps in again like, hey, we'd like to have a team. If that's going to work, maybe then we look at one of the teams that's not doing well, one of the teams that maybe has a problem at some point with ownership, and then you make a relocation take place rather than expansion. The problem with that is then you don't get the expansion fees. The NHL really likes their expansion fees. So you have a relocation fee, but it's not going to be as high as an expansion fee, right? And it really feels like this is the limit. There's a finality to this. When they hit 30 teams, it didn't feel like it was the end. It felt like this is the end for now. They've expanded by 9 teams in a decade. They've already basically maximized the amount of players that they can strew throughout the league. They're not going to be able to get more teams and dilute the talent even further, because that was a problem. And it feels like 32 teams is the limit. 32 draft picks in the first round. 30. It's a good number. And if you go to 33, 34, as soon as you go to 33, you kind of have to go to 36, don't you? So if they bring in one city, one franchise, you kind of have to bring in a minimum of 4. So there's also the diluted talent pool, which, I mean, I've thought about doing videos, and I haven't done one in a long time, on the idea of if you hadn't had expansion, if we still had the original 21 teams and you hadn't had expansion to San Jose and Ottawa and Tampa, if you had kept it as 21 teams, what would the league look like now? You would have absolutely stacked teams. Every team on some level would be stacked. But people will point this out and they'd be right. By expanding, you get more kids watching hockey, more kids playing hockey, and odds are some of the kids that right now are in the NHL, without the expansion in California and the southern states, they may not have had as much interest in the game, and you may not have the kind of apparatus that develops players as well as it does in the U.S. National Development Team program that we have right now, if not for the expansion in the States and expanding to the South and really turning it into a national sport, whereas it was a regional sport before that, right? So there's that argument to be made on both sides of whether, should they keep a team in Arizona? Probably they should, for as long as is possible, because it does feel like it's making a difference, even if Arizona's losing money on the ice. But yeah, weaker teams, if you go beyond 32, I think that's just a given. And if you had, let's say you had 40 teams, well, now 40 first-round draft picks? Your second draft pick, if you're worst in the league, would be 41st? It gets really dicey at that point, doesn't it? Now, I want to close out on this, and I put this in a different color because I'm going to make different arguments on each side. The economic struggles that we've been through over the last year and a half, huge. The idea of expanding beyond 32 teams, I don't think it's going to work. I'll even say that if we had COVID take place before Seattle's announced, I don't know that Seattle's coming into the league. I really don't know. I think that they'd already made that commitment, and then everything got shut down, and they've already made that commitment. They're already putting up the building. I don't know if, with the economy the way that it's been over the last 16 months, if you would find an owner saying, yeah, I'll put $650 million of my own money into it, and after all these arena upgrades and whatever needs to be done in my city, it's going to cost me about $800 million. I'll do all that with that economic uncertainty hanging over everything I do. I think you'd have a hard time selling that right now. So I think that's part of the reason why you stop at 32. I would throw the flat cap up there, but the cap becomes this whole other thing. You could make the argument that further expansion helps, because then you'd have more teams being able to spread the money around. GMs would be able to get rid of bad contracts easier. There's an argument to be made on both sides when it comes to the flat cap. So we'll come over to the don't stop side, because that's fun. Everybody loves fun, right? Well, I'm on the stop side. So apparently I'm not in favor of fun. But money. You don't stop because of money. The idea that $650 million is the fee now for expansion. And remember, they don't share that with the players. That's all owners' money. And Vegas isn't getting a cut of that money either. That $650 million is being split by the first 30 franchises. Vegas doesn't get any of the money. So people say, why isn't Vegas in the expansion draft? Vegas is paying by not getting paid. So there's a lot of money in it. This is at a time of economic struggle where owners might be like, hey, we could get another $650 million. I like $650 million. So, and again, the players don't get any of it. So happy, joy, right? Playoff expansion, they've talked about it. I think there's more. It's more likely now that we'll see a playoff expansion again than before we got into the expansion or the economic struggles of the last 16 months. More playoffs equals more money. We could see expansion of playoffs throughout sports and expansions of regular seasons where need be. I don't think the NHL will expand its regular season, but could we see a return of an 84-game schedule? So the schedule they used to have was 84 games, and 2 games a year were in neutral sites. it was a mixed bag. Sometimes those neutral site games were a lot of fun, sometimes not so much. But could we see a return of those because it gives you a chance to make some more money and potentially bust into another market? You could have 10 games a year in Quebec City, right? You could have 8 games a year in Hamilton. You could make a ton more money if you plan that out. So by that extension, if you expand the playoffs, you're able to do that as well. Where now you've got 24 teams in the playoffs. 16 teams are officially in round one, but you've got the other teams deciding who's going to get into that final 16, the same as we saw in the bubble. I think there'd be some work to do on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they try it. And grow the game. This is the argument that we're going to hear a lot, right? You're growing the game. And as I made the argument here, when it comes to Arizona and some of the southern markets, it seems to work that you're growing interest in the game. Now, whether or not you're growing enough interest in the game, it is an interest you're growing there that if you had a team in Hamilton, you're not. So if you put a team in Hamilton, does it make money? Absolutely, yes. No argument. A team in Hamilton would absolutely make money. It would not negatively impact Toronto. I don't think it'd negatively impact Buffalo either. I think it would just make a lot of money. There are a lot of hockey fans in Hamilton, but does it grow the league? Does it grow interest in the league? No. Does it change the TV agreement with Rogers? No. It really doesn't. You'd have 8 Canadian teams instead of 7, which would be great. But again, hockey in Canada it's part of our fabric. It's part of this country. It's a major part of this country, and so expansion in Canada makes you some money, which is nice with the economy being the way that it's been. But you probably grow the game better by expanding into other more non-traditional territories or going to Europe. So if you go to Europe, and the tricky part of going to Europe is the KHL, because you can't share a building with the KHL, and the KHL's already got its foothold in most of Europe. So that's where things get a little trickier. But one thing, and I saw a comment on this or something along those lines about, hey, so what if the NHL had a Premier League like you see in Europe, and you had relegation at the end of the year? That'd be interesting and everything. Here's the problem. The New York Rangers. New York Rangers make a ton of money, right? New York Rangers, very well-run franchise at certain points, very poorly run franchise at other points. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the New York Rangers end up being relegated. I cannot imagine the amount of outrage from Rangers ownership. I cannot imagine the amount of outrage that we would see from broadcasters at the idea that now they're in a second-tier league. The LA Kings would be Toronto Maple Leafs, Montreal Canadiens. Any of these teams end up being relegated, there'd be some issues. So I can't see there ever being a situation where there would actually be a Premier League and a second-tier league like what we see with soccer in mostly in Europe. And I know there's other sports that do that as well, but I can't see you being able to sell that to NHL owners. Hey guys, some of you may be NHL owners and some of you might be NHL 2 owners. How do you feel about NHL 2? It's a second tier league. Okay, so I see everybody's picking up rocks. Let's not have these meetings at the beach. But yeah, I can't see that flying. I can't see it flying. But it's an idea, so I threw it on the board. And again, the one thing with Europe, so let's just put the European expansion on there again. If they found a way to make it work with Europe, then they could have a TV deal in Europe, right? So then you have a TV deal in the States, TV deal in Canada, and then you could have a really good TV deal in Europe. And you could really then say that the NHL is global, and that that this is our global expansion. The problem is, and I didn't put it over here because it just seems weird because I'm arguing to stop at 32 teams, so I shouldn't need to make this argument. But the issue with Europe is time zone, and when their games would be on, and teams on this side of the pond having to fly across the ocean and play games, and they'd probably do like 8-game road trips each time, and it's an issue, and I don't know how you would make that work. So as much as the whole, hey, if they had an 8-team expansion in Europe, yeah, that'd be great, especially if it was $650 million each. Even if it was split between all 32 teams, you take $650 million, multiply it by 8, that equals a Merry Christmas. And again, the players wouldn't get it. But what the players would get out of an expansion like that is an extra couple hundred players in the union, and that much more power over things. The bigger the union is, the more power they have. The bigger the NHL is, the more power the union has as well, because it's a lot of markets, it's a lot of owners. It might be easier to get a wedge in there with the owners as well, with the league that was 40 teams deep. I just don't see it happening. But again, we'll go through this. 40 is bigger than 32. And I put that up there because it really is. It's honest, right? If you had 36 teams, and if you plan it out right, your league's making more money. If you go to 40 teams, your league's making way more money. Again, you have to plan it out correctly. This is where you have to come back to the struggling franchises part, right? So if you've got a team that's struggling to make the playoffs and you expand the league by 8 teams, even if you expand the playoffs by a bit, it might be harder and harder to A, convince fans to support those franchises, and B, convince players to go there. Now they've got brand new teams they can go to rather than that team too. So the bigger the league gets, the more choices that players have of where they're going to play. And it might actually get more and more difficult for some teams to actually put together a roster that's A, competitive, and B, you can sell at a local level. So yeah, you don't want to be diluting that talent pool further and ending up in a situation where you're taking those struggling teams and putting them out. And then what? So you grow to 40 teams, and then you've got 2 teams that say go under. So do you just you absorb those? Like, do you dissolve those teams? I would think at that point you kind of have to, because if you don't go to Europe, if you have 40 teams in North America, well, you're not going to have any other markets that can support an NHL team. So now you've expanded and you're dissolving teams at the same time. You've become the WHA. So yeah, merchandise sales are huge. Now, there is no talk right now of them doing another 31 team, everybody gets a jersey thing like the reverse retros. I think the reverse retros were a mixed bag. If they were a huge cash cow for the NHL, I think we'd be hearing about what next year's plan is for this 31 or 32 team now jersey design. Maybe they're taking the year off because Seattle's coming in, but my guess is that they're going to take it a little bit more carefully next time around. Some of the reverse retros were great and some of them not as much. And so we're already seeing some of them on sale, even though they were one run. They were only one run, and some of them just aren't selling. When I'm on Cool Hockey and I'm looking through it, I'm like, wow, these just didn't sell. So, and some of them sold out immediately. So the NHL will likely do their due diligence. But if you add more teams, you have more merchandise. You have more that you can sell. And I know that Seattle's a top seller because that's what I've been seeing on various websites I get hats from and just general merchandise from. Seattle's coming up early and often as a top seller. That happens with every expansion team, though. So you have to watch and see if it's going to stay that way in years upcoming. Because being a big seller in your first year, that's not a big deal. Being a big seller in your 5th or 6th year, that's when it becomes a big deal. And again, it comes down to merchandising and doing it well. Vegas has done a very good job with the merchandising. Honestly, almost everything that Vegas has put out has looked great. And one reason you don't stop is the economic bounce back. So we've had these struggles, but it feels like now, things are opening up here and things look good. Future's bright. And maybe, say, a year or 2 years down the road, as the economy continues its bounce back, maybe that's the time to strike and go beyond 32 teams. But it'll be interesting to see if the NHL eventually does. Because I don't have any idea of whether or not they eventually do. I think if an owner in Houston showed up and said, I have $750 million burning a hole in my pocket. I was thinking for $750 million, could we maybe get an NHL team maybe? I think they'd get it. I do. I think they'd get it. I just have this feeling that if somebody walked up to the NHL and said, I have $750 million right here in a wheelbarrow, do you want it? The NHL go, yeah, we want it. Okay, sure, cool. All right, cool. Great. That's awesome. Thanks. So, but we'll see, right? We'll see whether or not this is where we stop and whether or not there are owners who show up with wheelbarrows full of money at NHL head office and say, man, I'd love to get this off my hands. Are you interested? So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Do we stop at 32 or do we go beyond? I say stop at 32. I think the NHL stops at 32, but money does talk, and it shouts pretty loudly right now. So let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.